few weeks ago, I flew up to Scotland for 24 hours to drive the new Vauxhall Mokka X and the new Vauxhall Zafira Tourer. And it got me thinking, it might be quite fun to show you guys what happens on a car launch. I did a similar video a couple of years ago when I flew to Amsterdam for 24 hours to drive the new Toyota Yaris, and that was slightly different. I basically just walked around with a GoPro on my head for 24 hours. But this I just thought would be quite fun to show a bit more in depth about what actually happens on a car launch and talk you through it as well. So the Vauxhall launch, like most other launches that you go on, started with a plane. This time it wasn't to some foreign location, somewhere like Germany or France. It was a simple trip up to Scotland. So we landed in Edinburgh, and to be honest, the weather was slightly worse than it was when we set off from the south coast. But it didn't matter because we were straight off the plane and into the cars. So first of all, we were driving the Mokka X. As you can see, we got to see some of the sights of Edinburgh on our way through, including a couple of huge bridges. I wish I could remember what their names were. And then from there, we went to a place called Dalmeny House, which is an ancient manor house that's been in the same family for hundreds and hundreds of years. And it had some of the most priceless art you could ever hope to find. There was a whole room dedicated to things that used to belong to Louis XIV. I hate to think how much that stuff would cost. After that, I had a fight with an umbrella before driving further up to a coffee stop and then up into some hills and mountains. Now the idea was at this stage that we'd take a kind of 10-minute off-road track basically to see how the four-wheel drive system on the Mokka X copes. To be honest, it wasn't that treacherous. The terrain was bumpy and it was rocky and muddy, but it wasn't really a proper off-roader. However, we had amazing views of the countryside in Scotland. Both Scotland and Wales are two favourite locations for car companies when they do launches in the UK because the roads are just so incredible and the scenery makes some great photos, so that's what we had. We then made our way back to Edinburgh on the motorway, fairly standard journey, going past something called the Kelpies, which are two horses' heads basically that are public artwork made of metal. They are huge and they weigh something like 300 tonnes each. Once we made it back to Edinburgh, we checked into our hotel and then there was a short break until we had a press conference. Again, this is fairly standard procedure. The car companies want to give as much information to you as they can so you can give your best opinion on the car. So we had a little press conference held inside and there was actually a car inside. And then we headed out on a luxury coach by a man called Alan and drove through Edinburgh towards our dinner stop, which was a really nice restaurant that's a few hundred years old up by Edinburgh Castle. From there, me and a few other journalists decided to walk through Edinburgh rather than just get the coach back so we could actually see where we were, because I've never been to Edinburgh before, so for me it was quite interesting. The morning after, there were a whole load of German journalists there to drive the Opel versions of the Mokka, and we jumped into the Zafira Tourer. I think it looks pretty good, and I actually quite enjoyed it. I thought it drove really well. But it's lost a distinctive face that it used to have, which I actually really quite liked. So who do we drive with? What tends to happen is you pair up with a journalist that you know. Quite often it's the same faces because it's the same people that have to go off and do these launches for their magazines or websites or newspapers. You normally drive for a while, then you'll swap over with your co-driver, and then you'll get to something called a coffee stop, which is, as the name suggests, a coffee stop where you have a cake and a cup of tea, and then you tend to swap cars so you get a different choice of engine or a different gearbox, so you tend to swap with another pair of journalists. The coffee stop we went to on the second day was this lovely little kind of tea cottage by a lake that served some of the best donuts I've ever eaten, which I will point out proves a problem for quite a few journalists because you get fed probably every hour and a half on these things, so there's a real danger that one day I will weigh probably as much as a horse. From there we got back in the cars and we did one final stint towards Edinburgh Airport, and that was it. We hand the keys back and then another group of journalists fly in and try the car for the second day. It's all very quick, but in reality, while this seems like a jolly to a lot of people, our job is just to get in, drive the car and assess it and write about it as quickly as we can. So for car companies it's quite a quick turnaround, but you just get used to it. It's just how the industry works. Again, we had a nice trip back on the plane, and what was really exciting for me, and I know this is going to sound ridiculous, is the flight path for planes that are coming into land at Southampton flies over my flat and over Winchester. So I was able to see my flat and my garden and also things like my church and other places like that. So I was just so excited. And there we have it. From then on, I just got back on the train and headed back to Winchester. I think it's worth pointing out as well that although we're going to nice hotels and nice locations, the car companies aren't doing that to try and get a good review off of us. I think the idea is, from the car company's perspective, if they keep you mentally happy, i.e. give you water, give you food, then you're more likely to be able to assess the car well. If you're hungry and in a crappy mood because you didn't sleep very well, then your perception of the car is going to be different to if you had a good night's sleep and you're feeling pretty fresh.